Hey guys, tonight we're heading way back to the smoky, stinky, and slightly tragic campfires of the American Revolutionary Army. Picture this. It's pitch dark, the air is cold and damp, and somewhere in the woods of New Jersey, a young army cook is fumbling through the mud, trying to find the beans he dropped into the slush. His boots squelch. His fire barely flickers. Dinner is half-cooked, half-soaked, and fully disgusting. And guess what? You're not a soldier. You're the cook. You'll spend your nights elbow-deep in weevil-filled flour, trying to boil food over wet wood while a dozen tired men shout for breakfast they'll complain about anyway. Oh, and when supplies go bad, you get the blame. You probably won't survive this job with your sanity intact, much less your digestive system. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the time where you're watching. I love seeing how far this sleepy little camp stretches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 1777, and the Continental Army is freezing. Soldiers are wrapped in threadbare coats, trying to sleep under the stars near the banks of the Delaware River. And near a crooked pine tree, a young cook named Eli drags a battered iron pot across a patch of snow. He's hoping to make bean stew tonight, again, for the 6th time this week. The firewood is wet, again. Eli curses softly, but not too loud. General Washington isn't far off, and while he probably won't hear, some overly eager officer might. Sparks sputter. The fire gasps. A single bean rolls from the pot, lands in the slush, and is promptly stepped on by a passing mule. Dinner's delayed, Eli mutters to no one in particular. He adds a pinch of salt, maybe too much, maybe none at all. It's too dark to tell. The soldiers around him mutter, shuffle closer, and pretend not to shiver. One asks if there's bacon. Eli says, "Only in your dreams." The stew starts to bubble slightly. Not a rolling boil, more of a sad burp. It smells vaguely edible. A soldier leans in and mutters, "Smells better than yesterday." Slightly. Eli doesn't respond. He just stirs the beans with a stick that's definitely not clean. Historians still argue whether these campfire meals ever provided enough nutrition or morale to keep the army moving. But the truth? It probably wasn't about flavor. It was about surviving the night without starving. And tonight, as the wind whips through the trees and a light snow begins to fall, Eli pulls his cloak tighter, squints at the pot, and prays no one gets sick. Again, morning arrives, and with it, misery. The sun barely rises. It just sort of sulks behind a wall of clouds. Eli, the cook, groans as he peels himself off the half-frozen ground. His socks are soaked through, his fingers are stiff, and his pot, still crusted with last night's bean surprise. He kicks a lump of snow off the fire pit, now just ash and soggy wood. The fire is long dead. Smoke lingers like regret. Breakfast? Salt pork and hardtack. Again. Salt pork, if you've never had the pleasure, is just fatty meat soaked in brine until it's practically a salt lick. It smells like meat, but vaguely fishy. It tastes like chewing on old rope dipped in ocean water. Eli hacks at the chunk with a knife that barely cuts. The meat's frozen solid. He ends up smashing it with a rock. The men start to gather. Some have frost on their eyebrows. Others are already arguing about who gets the least burned biscuit. One of them complains loudly about the crunchy beans from dinner. Another mutters something about finding a musket if this happens again. Eli ignores them all. He sets the pork over the rekindled flames, smoke billowing straight into his eyes. They water instantly. A little extra seasoning, courtesy of tears. Hardtack comes next. Think of it as a brick made of flour and spite. It's so dense you could defend yourself with it. Soldiers have been known to break teeth on it, or toss it in stew just to soften it enough not to chip a molar. As he stacks the pale rock-like crackers on a cloth, Eli spots something moving, just slightly, in the flour sack. Oh no, another weevil. He flicks it out without ceremony. Extra protein, he mumbles. The soldiers won't notice. Or they will, and they'll blame him anyway. Historians still argue whether cooks like Eli had formal training or were just unlucky volunteers with a talent for not burning water. In Eli's case, he'd once run a tavern kitchen. Now he ran on frustration and fumes. There's a sudden yell. Someone slipped in the mud again. It's the third this morning. And someone else is yelling about their socks being missing. Spoiler, Eli used them to pat his cooking pot last night. He's not proud of it. Smoke coils upward. The pork crackles. Eli leans back, stretches, and almost smiles, until a soldier rushes up to say the coffee ration is missing. Coffee? Gone? Eli closes his eyes. It's going to be a long day, he mutters, as the clouds thicken and the snow starts again. The pork didn't just smell weird, it smelled wrong. Eli had tried to mask it with some ash, a bit of vinegar, and a strong wish, but even the hungriest private wrinkled his nose as it hit the tin plate. This smells like old socks, one muttered. Worse, said another. Like someone boiled the old socks. The complaints rolled in faster than the coffee ever would. Spoiled meat wasn't uncommon. Salt pork, despite being preserved, didn't exactly come with a freshness guarantee. If the barrel got damp, the salt could wash away. If it got too hot, things turned squishy. And if the shipment took too long, well, your pork grew personality. Wasn't like this when I opened it, Eli protested, swearing to anyone who'd listen. He'd sniffed it, poked it, even cooked it longer than usual, which wasn't saying much since the fire barely worked. But now a group of hangry soldiers stared at him, arms crossed, plates untouched. One of them, Miller, glared. Last week your stew made Jackson sick for 2 days. Jackson eats mud on a dare, Eli shot back. Still, it didn't help. Word was already spreading through camp. The cook's trying to poison us. Historians still argue whether cooks were ever punished for bad rations or spoiled meals. Officially, no. Unofficially? That depends on how angry the men were and how close you were to a muddy trench. Eli felt it. The pressure. He had to make things right, or at least edible. That afternoon, he tried to fry the next slab of pork to kill whatever was haunting it. Problem was, he had no pan, just a shallow pot and a rock he'd tried to flatten it with. The pork curled like it was trying to escape. Smoke filled the air. Again. It sizzled, popped, and then nothing. The fire died. Of course it did. He leaned back, covered in grease and defeat. Somewhere, someone laughed. Better luck next war, Eli. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, the general's aide stopped by. General wants to know what that smell is. Eli froze. Which smell? The aide blinked. The one making the horses panic. Eli didn't answer, just stared into the pot now bubbling with sadness. The next morning, Eli had to chisel his way into breakfast. Winter wasn't just cold, it was cruel. The rations were frozen stiff like miniature meat statues. Even the potatoes, rare as they were, had turned into icy rocks. Eli smacked one against a stump. It bounced, not a good sign. He knelt beside his makeshift fire pit. The snow was deeper than expected, and yesterday's ashes had turned to slush. Starting a fire felt like asking the wind for a favor. His fingers, numb and red, struggled to spark even a small flame. The wood? Damp. Always. It hissed when he tried to light it. One branch actually steamed. He stared at it, offended. So he did what cooks across the camp sometimes did in desperation. He poured a splash of precious rum rations onto the pile and lit it with a shaky hand. Whoosh! Instant flames, and also instant regret. Rum was not easy to come by. A soldier saw it and gasped, "You just burned rum?" Eli shrugged. "You want warm food or a warm belly?" The answer wasn't clear. That day's breakfast was more like warm potato mush and mystery grease. The pork once again smelled off. Eli scraped off the green bits and hoped no one noticed. They did. Historians still argue whether Revolutionary Army rations ever met their official nutritional targets. Most evidence says probably not. Winter camps especially were plagued with shortages, spoilage, and something called camp scurvy, which was as fun as it sounds. Eli shuffled through the supply sacks. But they were practically empty. Flour, gone. Salt, clumped. Beans, frozen into a single mass. The only thing not frozen was a lone cabbage that looked like it had seen war itself. He chopped it into the stew. It disintegrated. Some of the younger soldiers watched him work, eyes wide, lips blue. "Will there be bread today?" one asked hopefully. Eli didn't answer. He didn't have the heart. Instead, he handed the soldier a dented tin cup. Inside, warm water, half a potato, and floating bits of cabbage leaf. He called it victory soup. No one laughed. Nearby, a mule sneezed. It sounded judgmental. As the cold deepened and snow drifted down again, Eli huddled by his struggling fire, stirring the stew like it might eventually become something better. It wouldn't, but he stirred anyway. By noon, the so-called kitchen was alive with shouting, smoke, and absolute chaos. Eli's cooking station was technically just 3 rocks forming a sad triangle around a blackened pot. No roof, no shelter, no peace. Around him swirled a circus of hungry, freezing, loud-mouthed soldiers, all shouting different things. "Is it ready yet? Did you burn it again? Tell me there's salt this time! Why does it smell like boots?" Eli ignored most of it. He'd learned to block out the noise. He focused instead on the pot, which was now filled with a sludge of beans, gray meat, and something green he didn't remember adding. Possibly moss, possibly cabbage, possibly neither. To his left, a private tried to toss more wood onto the fire. It was wet. Naturally. The fire hissed in protest. Smoke erupted. Everyone coughed violently, like a synchronized act. Across the camp, a group of soldiers was arguing over a turnip. One wanted to boil it. One wanted to trade it. The third claimed it was a rock. Eli considered walking off into the woods, becoming a hermit, eating tree bark. It might have been an upgrade. Historians still argue whether the average Continental Army camp had any structure to food prep. Officers claimed there were organized mess groups and rotating duties, but on the ground, it was more like controlled chaos, if you remove the controlled part. That day, someone had the bright idea to move Eli's rock kitchen closer to the tents to cut down on cold trips. Bad move. Within 10 minutes, a gust of wind blew hot ash into someone's bedroll, which quickly went up in flames. Eli stomped it out with his boots, both steaming and swearing. He nearly fell into the stew. Again, a sergeant ran up holding a blackened spoon. "Do we have to eat this?" Eli glared. "You want a menu?" Someone nearby shouted, "We want a miracle!" To make matters worse, a dog appeared, skinny, shivering, and very interested in the pot. It crept closer, then lunged for the ladle. Eli smacked it away, not hard, just enough to send a message. The dog barked once, offended, then stole a biscuit from an unwatched plate and vanished into the fog. The cook sighed. His stew bubbled with uncertainty. His socks were still damp. And now, thanks to the fire incident, someone had named him Chef Fireball. He hated it here. That night, Eli opened the flour barrel, and it moved. Not metaphorically, it wiggled. Just a little. Just enough. He froze. Then, with the careful dread of a man who's already seen too much, he reached in with a wooden scoop and pulled up a heap of flour. It looked normal at first. White, dusty, slightly clumpy from the damp. But then, there it was. A twitch. A squirm. Rats! Not one, not two. An entire family reunion of them had taken up residence inside the Army's last decent sack of flour. Eli screamed. Not out loud, but internally. Externally, he made a very mature sound like, "Up," and dropped the scoop. One particularly bold rat blinked up at him. Just sat there, right on the edge of the barrel, like it owned the place, which technically it now did. That morning's biscuits were officially canceled. And the soldiers? Not understanding subtle rat-based sabotage, they grumbled louder than usual. "No bread again? We had stew yesterday. What's next, boiled socks?" Eli wiped flour from his brow, which also might have been rat dander, and lied through his teeth. "No flour today. It was water damaged." The men groaned in unison. Historians still argue whether pest control existed in any formal sense during the Revolution. It didn't. Rats were part of the scenery. Flour, grain, salted meat. If it was edible, it was shared with vermin. Cooks like Eli just hoped no one noticed the occasional chew mark. Later that day, Eli tried to salvage the remaining flour by sifting it with a bit of cloth. The rats were gone now, possibly chased off by a jealous raccoon. But the flour had this odd smell. Musky, nutty, possibly alive. He made something anyway. A sort of pancake, thin and scorched, with more smoke than taste. A soldier bit into it and said, "Is this bread, or are you pranking us again?" "Both," Eli replied flatly. He sat back by the fire. Rat-stirred flour on one side, dried beans on the other, and wondered, not for the first time, how he had ended up here. He could have been a cobbler, a nice, dry, indoor job, or maybe a barber. Dangerous, sure, but at least the tools were clean. Instead, he was Chef Ratflower, cooking cursed pancakes in a war zone. And the worst part? There were still 2 meals left to make today. Eli needed firewood again. It had rained all night, soaking every twig, branch, and scrap of bark for miles. The fire was barely breathing this morning, just a faint orange glow under a pile of sad-looking ash. He poked it gently. It hissed back at him. So he grabbed his hat, his axe, which was mostly handle, and trudged out toward the edge of camp. Everything squished. His boots, the mud, even the trees seemed soggy. He reached for a fallen branch and it crumbled in his hand like wet bread. Useless. 10 minutes later, he returned to camp with 4 damp sticks, one of which was probably just a large mushroom. The fire laughed at him, literally crackled with mockery. Nearby, 2 soldiers were arguing over whether they should just burn part of the fence. The fence, mind you, was supposed to protect the horses, but the horses had already wandered off 2 days ago, probably looking for a meal that didn't taste like ash and regret. "You touch that fence, I'll tell the captain," one snapped. The other shrugged. "You want warm stew or warm horses?" It was a valid question. Eventually, a solution was found. Someone donated part of a broken cartwheel. Not technically allowed, but no one was about to stop them. The wheel burned hot and bright. It also smelled terrible, like old varnish and mouse droppings, but it got the job done. Eli got to work. Beans again, because what else was there? A few rogue turnips were tossed in for color. And mystery, mostly mystery. Historians still argue whether Revolutionary Army soldiers were allowed to use camp materials as firewood. Technically, no. Practically, constantly. Fires needed fuel, and regulation never stood a chance against frozen toes. As the stew simmered, a private walked up, sniffed the air, and said, "Smells like paint." Eli didn't deny it. The cartwheel added a certain je ne sais splinter to the mix. Later that evening, someone did suggest tearing down an entire lean-to for kindling. This sparked a new debate. Shelter or soup? By nightfall, half the firewood was gone. The stew was somehow both watery and sticky, and Eli was once again wiping smoke from his eyes. The fence remained, but barely. And the horses still missing? By the end of the week, Eli's stew had a new nickname: belly roulette. You might feel fine after eating it, or you might sprint to the nearest bush clutching your stomach like you'd swallowed a thunderstorm. Either way, once you'd eaten it, you were committed. It wasn't entirely Eli's fault. With no fresh supplies and half the flour barrel still rat-scented, he was down to scraps. Dried beans, old meat, turnip peels, and a chunk of something orange that might have been carrot. Or candle wax. He threw it all into one pot and let it boil for hours. Too long, in fact. The beans started to dissolve, turning the broth a suspicious grayish purple. A soldier walked by, peered into the pot, and said, "Looks like something died in there." Eli didn't answer. He just kept stirring. By lunchtime, the stew was technically ready. Technically, it was hot. It smelled edible. Sort of. The first few brave souls stepped up with their tin bowls and scooped a ladleful each. Within 30 minutes, groans echoed across the camp. Not dramatic groans, but the kind that start deep and rise steadily, followed by a rush toward the tree line. Someone tripped over a bucket. Someone else cursed Eli's name in 3 creative ways. One man just lay on the ground, whispering about the stew of doom. Historians still argue whether Army cooks intentionally served spoiled food to stretch supplies. No evidence supports it, but some journals hint that certain stews were avoided like illness itself. One entry from a Connecticut soldier simply read, "Ate soup, paid the price." That night, Eli stood alone by the fire watching the pot bubble gently, the stew inside thick enough to hold a spoon upright. He sighed. "It wasn't that bad," he mumbled. A rat wandered by, sniffed the air, and kept walking. Even that felt personal. Later, a young recruit shuffled up with his bowl, looked at Eli, and asked softly, "Will this one hurt me?" Eli gave the pot a slow stir and replied, "Depends on how fast you can run." The boy blinked. Then he took a half-serving and walked away, chewing like someone bracing for a storm. Dinner for the officers looked different. While Eli was elbow-deep in another questionable pot of bean stew, fragrant aromas wafted from the other end of camp. Real spices, roasted duck, freshly baked bread. Someone even had actual butter. Butter! It glistened like a golden miracle in the lamplight. Eli didn't have butter. He had something that used to be lard, and now smelled like forgotten dreams. The officer's cook, A cheerful man named Matthias with a neatly trimmed beard and suspiciously clean apron was slicing fruit. Fruit. In winter. Imported, he said casually, to no one in particular. Someone asked if it was from France. He just smiled. Meanwhile, back in Eli's corner of culinary despair, the soldiers gathered like vultures around his pot of bubbling despair. Dinner was thin tonight. Literally. He'd added extra water just to stretch the stew far enough. A private peered into the pot. Is that cabbage again? Eli nodded. And bean water. Just water? No, it touched a bean once. There was a long pause. Then came the scraping of bowls and the shuffling of feet. Disappointment made the rounds like a bad joke. Historians still argue whether officer meals were truly lavish or just slightly less horrible. Some accounts describe chickens, preserved wines, even cheeses. Others insist they were just as miserable, though judging by the roast duck Matthias had casually resting on a silver tray, Eli had his doubts. A nearby soldier muttered, "Officers eat like kings while we chew boot soup." Eli replied, "It's not boot soup." The soldier raised an eyebrow. Eli looked down at the pot, hesitated, then added, "Okay, yes, there's a bit of boot flavor, but not on purpose." The reality was simple. If you had rank, you ate better. If you were Eli, you fed the rest. And if they got sick, guess whose fault it was? That night, as he scraped the last of the stew from the sides of the pot, Eli glanced at the officer's tent and caught a glimpse of golden candlelight, a shadow lifting a wine glass. He turned back to the fire, spooned himself a single scoop of soggy beans, and muttered, "Five-star misery." Then he sat down to chew in silence. When there was no food left and no hope of a delivery wagon showing up, the soldiers turned to a time-honored tradition: foraging, filching, and flatbread. Eli watched nervously as a handful of men returned from the woods, arms full of questionable greenery. One of them proudly held up a limp bunch of what he claimed was wild spinach. It smelled like weeds and sadness. Another pulled a mysterious bundle from his coat. "Found some flour," he whispered, grinning. Eli squinted. "That looks like plaster." "Nope. Definitely flour," the man said, already tossing it into the pot. The fire crackled. Eli sighed. Whatever it would soon be soup. Desperation made people creative. Flatbread made from ash and bark shavings, tea brewed from pine needles and leftover shoe leather. One soldier tried to toast a strip of dried canvas. He said it tasted like memory. Nobody asked what kind. Historians still argue whether the Continental Army ever encouraged foraging or simply turned a blind eye. Technically, it wasn't allowed. Stealing from farms was a court-martial offense. But when your belly grumbled louder than the drums, ethics got a little flexible. Some soldiers crept into nearby fields and borrowed onions, apples, or even a chicken. Once, Eli caught a private trying to smuggle a turnip inside his boot. "You can't cook that," Eli said. "I wasn't going to cook it." Eli decided not to ask. That afternoon, a loaf of something resembling bread emerged from the fire. Sort of. It was black on the outside, raw in the middle, and smoked like a chimney. The men cheered anyway, until an officer caught wind of the unauthorized snack-making. "You can't use rations for personal meals," he barked. "This is theft." Eli blinked. "I thought we were starving." "You are, but officially." The officer confiscated the loaf. He didn't say where it went, but later that evening someone spotted breadcrumbs on his coat. That night Eli scraped burnt dough off the side of his pot, chewing on a crispy shard and thinking maybe, just maybe, that was the best thing he'd eaten all week. It started with a vinegar barrel and ended with nearly 50 angry soldiers demanding justice. Eli hadn't touched it. He swore up and down. But when the first ladle of vinegar was poured into the morning stew, every head turned. It was off, weak, barely acidic, like someone had mixed in river water and hoped no one would notice. They noticed. Vinegar wasn't just for flavor. It kept meat from turning green, cleaned tools, and, most critically, made hardtack soft enough to bite. Without it, the biscuits were just rocks in disguise. The first complaints were quiet, mumbled grumbles. But by lunch, a full-blown vinegar panic had taken hold. Soldiers stood around the barrel like mourners, dipping fingers in and scowling. "It's watered down! This is just sour rain." "Who did this?" A circle formed around Eli, who was doing his best to look very busy with beans. "I didn't touch the barrel," he muttered, stirring aggressively. A corporal stepped forward. "You're the cook. You're responsible." "For everything?" Eli asked. Did I also steal your socks? Eat your beans? 'Cause the rain? The corporal considered. Maybe. Historians still argue whether food tampering was common among desperate soldiers. Some believe guards were posted at supply barrels to prevent exactly this sort of thing. Others think it was just chaos and opportunity. Either way, someone had gotten to the vinegar and diluted it beyond repair. Later that afternoon, Eli caught a glimpse of Private Miller sneaking off with a dented tin flask. When questioned, he claimed it was river water with personality. By evening, morale had dipped as low as the temperature. Soldiers refused their stew, demanding real vinegar or real answers. A few even formed a tiny protest. 2 tents, 1 sign, and a chant. Bring back the bite. It fizzled out once it started snowing again. That night, Eli sat by the fire, nursing a bland, vinegary disappointment of a soup. The fire popped weakly. Someone sneezed nearby. He looked at the pot and whispered, "Next time I'm watering it, on purpose." And across camp the vinegar barrel sat, half full, half sour, and entirely suspicious. By the end of the month, the food situation had evolved from sad to questionable to, "You're joking, right?" There were no beans, no flour, no pork. The last onion had mysteriously disappeared 2 days earlier. More on that later. And now Eli stood over his battered pot, holding a strip of dried leather and wondering, genuinely, how long you had to boil a shoe before it stopped tasting like one. He tossed it in. With no other options, the men had started chewing on anything vaguely edible. Bark, twine, and yes, boiled boot soles. Supposedly, if you boiled leather long enough, it softened into something resembling food. Not good food, but chewable. It was either that or starve. The stew that night was a thick, beige slurry. Bits of hide floated in it like limp noodles. A few brave souls dipped their hardtack in and gnawed cautiously. One man called it boot soup deluxe. Another asked, "Is this the sole special?" Eli didn't laugh. Historians still argue whether the infamous boiled shoe soup stories were widespread or just isolated tales of desperation. Diaries confirm they happened, but how often? Hard to say. Still, Eli was living proof that when your supply line breaks down, your dinner might include your footwear. As the pot bubbled, someone handed Eli a tin cup filled with hot liquid. "Tea," the soldier said. Eli sniffed. "This is hot water with a pine cone in it." The man shrugged. "It's tea adjacent." Nearby, a new recruit gagged on his first bite of the soup and whispered, "That's not food. That's betrayal." Another suggested adding horse feed to the mix. The horses, of course, were still missing. Later, when the fire dimmed and the men sat around clutching their stomachs and whispering threats at their boots, Eli sighed and muttered, "Fine dining, 1777 style." He took a spoonful, chewed slowly, and thought, "Could be worse." Then he bit into a nail from the sole. Correction, it was worse. The cannonballs started falling just as Eli was halfway through baking the biscuits. It was supposed to be a quiet morning. Well, as quiet as a wartime camp could get. Eli had finally scraped together enough flour, part rat-chewed, part borrowed, mixed in some water, patted out flat circles, and laid them carefully on a hot rock near the fire. They weren't going to be good, but they would be solid. Literally. Hardtack biscuits were famous for their shelf life. Some said they lasted decades. Others joked you could build a house with them. But then, boom! The first shell hit somewhere near the edge of camp. Dust flew. The ground trembled. Eli instinctively flung himself over the biscuits, shielding them like precious children. "Not today," he muttered, clutching his pan. Soldiers ran past, grabbing muskets, shouting orders. Officers barked commands. A tent caught fire. But Eli, he was flipping biscuits, brushing off ash with one sleeve and swearing under his breath. "Tell the British they can have my dignity, but not my dough." Historians still argue whether cooks like Eli were ever expected to keep working mid-battle. Some suggest they packed up and fled. Others say they stood their ground, spat in danger's face, and kept the stew boiling. Eli definitely fell into the latter camp, mostly because he didn't want to start the recipe over. Another explosion hit closer this time. One biscuit rolled off the rock and landed in the mud. Eli retrieved it anyway. "Still good." A soldier skidded to a halt beside him. "Are you insane?" "Do not interrupt the rise," Eli replied. He shoved a biscuit into the man's hand. "Eat this. Might be your last meal." The soldier stared at it. It's still raw. So are you, Eli snapped, turning back to the fire. Eventually, the skirmish passed. Smoke settled. Someone limped by with a bandaged leg and a biscuit in their teeth. The fire still crackled. The biscuits? Slightly burned, definitely too hard, but somehow comforting. Eli sat down, wiped sweat from his brow, and took a bite. It chipped a tooth. He nodded solemnly. Perfect. The pot looked like regret. Gray, lumpy, and barely moving, the infamous peas porridge had returned to center stage. It wasn't pea soup. No, that would imply warmth, seasoning, and maybe even a touch of flavor. This was different. This was punishment in a pot. Eli stirred it slowly, watching as the spoon left grooves in the sludge that didn't refill. Just stayed there, like cement or depression. Again? One soldier muttered, eyeing the bubbling mass like it might attack. Eli nodded. Again. Peas porridge was made from dried split peas, water, and, if you were lucky, a scrap of meat or bone. Eli was not lucky. He had one half-shattered bay leaf and a strong sense of resentment. Historians still argue whether peas porridge was a staple or a last resort. Some claim it was nutritious and filling. Others point out that soldiers often buried their bowls when no one was watching. One diary entry described it as gruel with ambition but no execution. This batch had been cooking for 3 days. That wasn't unusual. Peas porridge was notorious for being reheated, over and over, until it became more texture than taste. Hence the rhyme: peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. Eli wasn't sure if it was day 3 or day 5. He'd stopped counting after the spoon stood up on its own. That morning, a squirrel wandered into camp, sniffed the air, and ran the other way. Even the wildlife had standards. A group of soldiers lined up, bowls in hand, eyes full of cautious optimism. First bite, and their faces told the story: slow chewing, faint disappointment, then silent resignation. Private Miller swallowed and said, "Tastes like boiled wallpaper." Eli shrugged. "It's a new recipe." Someone else poked the bowl. "Is it supposed to bounce?" "No," Eli said. "That's a surprise feature." By evening, the pot was half empty, not because it was good, but because hunger had won again. Eli scraped the sides, muttering under his breath. That night, as he rinsed the pot with snowmelt, he whispered to no one, "One more day of this, and I'm eating my belt." And behind him, the porridge sat, cold, congealed, still gray. Waiting. By morning, the air was thick with smoke and complaints. Every campfire, from the smallest cooking pit to the officer's roast duck bonanza, was billowing heavy clouds of eye-watering, throat-scraping smoke. It rolled across the tents like fog with an attitude, the kind that clings to your clothes, your hair, your soul. Eli had given up wiping his eyes. They watered constantly now, which made it hard to tell if he was crying from the smoke or from the meal he just burned. Again, he squinted through the haze, stirring a pot of what was supposed to be breakfast stew. The wood was damp, the flames were angry, and the wind kept shifting just enough to aim all the smoke directly into his face. Every single time. Historians still argue whether revolutionary cooks ever figured out how to avoid cooking smoke. Some say smart placement and windshielding helped. Others believe the smoke was a daily part of the suffering, a quiet punishment that drifted into every meal. A private stumbled up, coughing. "You cooking or trying to signal ships?" Eli didn't even blink. "If a British ship lands, maybe we can trade them for better food." The stew gurgled like it didn't want to exist. It smelled burnt, which was impressive, considering it was 80% water. "Breakfast is ready," Eli croaked, voice hoarse. A few men approached with tin bowls. They looked like they were walking into battle, not breakfast. One spooned it up and muttered, "Tastes like fire and sadness." "Good," Eli said. "That's what I was going for." At some point, a shirtless soldier tried waving the smoke away with a wet sock. It didn't help, just made the area smell worse. Another sat by the fire with tears streaming down his face. "I'm not sad," he declared between coughs. "I just miss oxygen." Eli handed him a crust of hardtack and nodded. "Eat this. It's less smoky." The man bit in, cracked a molar, and cried for real this time. The coffee ration went missing, and camp morale collapsed in under 12 minutes. It started with a quiet observation. A sleepy-eyed sergeant stumbled up to the cook fire, cradling an empty tin mug like it was his firstborn. "Morning," he mumbled. "Coffee?" Eli blinked. "What coffee?" The sergeant stared. You're joking. Eli pointed to the bare shelf behind him. Do I look like I'm joking? Panic began to ripple through camp. Word spread fast. The coffee barrel, already half empty from careful rationing, was completely gone. No beans, no grounds, not even the dusty dregs at the bottom. Somebody had stolen the last coffee ration. One private gasped, "This is treason!" Another clutched his forehead and whispered, "We are not men without coffee." A third declared, "I'll defect to the British if they've got caffeine." Historians still argue whether the Army truly relied on coffee to function or if it was just the only bearable thing on the menu. But letters and journals suggest coffee was a lifeline. Warm, bitter hope in a tin cup. Take that away, and the mood got dangerous. Eli tried to calm the crowd. "I'll make tea," he offered. "With what?" someone shouted. "You boiled the last pine cone yesterday." Tensions rose. A patrol was sent to question neighboring tents. One man was caught with a suspiciously jittery expression and very fresh breath. When confronted, he claimed, "I just like jumping in place." Another confessed he'd seen someone sneaking around near the supplies last night, but it was too dark to tell who. Conspiracy theories ignited like dry tinder. Some blamed the officers, others blamed the French allies. One soldier even accused Eli, pointing a trembling finger. "You stole it. You brewed it. You drank it alone." Eli, now covered in smoke and biscuit flour, laughed once. Just once. "If I'd had coffee, don't you think I'd look happier?" Eventually, the crowd dispersed, grumbling and caffeine-deprived. One soldier chewed on a piece of burnt hardtack just to feel something. Another tried boiling bark, just in case it does something. Eli sat by the fire, staring into the empty pot where coffee once lived. He whispered, "We were a civilization, and now, savages." That night someone stole the onions, all 3 of them. Eli had been saving them, carefully wrapped in a scrap of cloth and hidden behind a log, away from greedy eyes and twitchy fingers. They were small, slightly soft, and definitely starting to sprout. But they were his last real ingredients, the final flavor left in this godforsaken camp. And now they were gone. He discovered the theft at dawn, while reaching for them to spruce up yet another bean stew. His hand landed on empty cloth and a faint whiff of oniony betrayal. "No," he said softly. He searched everywhere, behind the log, under the pot, in the flour barrel, still twitching, by the way. He even checked inside the cook fire, just in case someone roasted them secretly. Nothing. Gone. Vanished like freedom. Word spread fast. Soldiers gathered like it was a murder scene. Someone stole the onions? All of them? Who would do something so heartless? Accusations flew. Private Miller was immediately suspect. He always looked guilty, but he swore on his mother's shovel collection that he didn't do it. A nearby corporal claimed to have seen someone sneaking into the cooking area at midnight, but couldn't describe them beyond shadowy and possibly French. Historians still argue whether food theft among Continental soldiers was rare or rampant. Official reports say it was disciplined harshly. But journals? They paint a different picture. One of sneaky fingers, missing biscuits, and entire roast chickens vanishing in the night. This was no chicken, though. This was 3 sad onions. And for Eli, it was personal. By midday, one onion's skin was found near the edge of camp, tattered, bite-marked, and covered in ash. Someone ate them raw. Eli stared at the evidence like a detective in a gritty mystery. "So this is what it's come to," he muttered. A soldier nearby whispered, "That was our last seasoning." Another just stared into his stew and sighed. "Now it just tastes like pain." That night, Eli ladled out the blandest meal yet. Not a hint of flavor, just mush and disappointment. No one spoke. No one chewed loudly. And across the camp, a single figure leaned against a tent post, chewing something and smiling. No proof, no justice, just onion breath and silence. Today was ration lottery day, otherwise known as spin the wheel of misery. Once every so often, a cart rolled in from somewhere slightly less miserable than this camp, bearing boxes of food wrapped in canvas and false hope. It wasn't enough for everyone to get everything, of course. That would be logical. Instead, names were drawn. Luck decided who got meat, who got biscuits, and who got a firm pat on the back and a bowl of thin soup. Eli hated ration day. He stood near the distribution table with a notched stick, ready to check off names and hand out whatever scraps came through. First up, Corporal Jameson. "Salted beef," Eli announced, reaching into the box. Jameson grinned, Real meat? Eli shrugged. Real something. Next name, Private Greaves. One roll of hardtack. Greaves accepted it solemnly, as if being handed a tombstone. Then came Private Daniels. Eli checked the list. Blank. Daniels frowned. Nothing? Nothing, Eli said. Better luck next war. Historians still argue whether the Continental Army ever had an effective, fair rationing system. Some sources say it was rotational. Others insist it depended on your rank, your charm, or your proximity to the supply sergeant's boots. Either way, fairness was more of a suggestion. A few lucky soldiers walked off grinning with slices of smoked ham or rare bits of molasses. The less lucky ones were given 2 spoonfuls of bean slop and a motivational grunt. By midday, tensions were rising. A scuffle broke out over a broken crate that might have contained dried apples, or possibly just sawdust. Either way, 2 men wrestled in the mud for it until an officer shouted them apart. Back at the cook fire, Eli tried to stretch the leftovers. He tossed the random bits, some lentils, half a biscuit, and a mysterious hunk of dried root, into the pot and stirred. It's ration stew, he told a waiting private. What's in it? Whatever fate allowed. That night, as soldiers gathered around their bowls, some sipped warm broth, others gnawed on slabs of meat, and a few just stared at their empty plates and tried to feel full anyway. Eli leaned against the fire, rubbing his arms against the cold and muttering, "Ration roulette. Every spin a winner." Then he bit into a piece of salted beef that might have been tree bark and sighed deeply. Salt was gone, and the panic set in fast. It started small. Eli noticed it first, sprinkling the bottom of the barrel into a stew and realizing that was it. The last of the supply. No backup sack, no hidden stash, no secret officer hoard. He checked. Just an empty wooden barrel and a whole lot of flavorless doom. At first he tried to hide it. He cooked the beans longer, boiled the pork until it curled like angry bacon, added a burned biscuit for depth. But the soldiers noticed. They always noticed. Why's this taste like warm sadness? Where's the salt? This stew feels unseasoned emotionally. Eli shrugged, stirring the lifeless soup. It's rustic. But rustic didn't cut it anymore. Salt wasn't just for taste. It preserved meat, cleaned wounds, and, critically, made the hardtack slightly less soul-destroying. Without it, rations spoiled faster, tempers flared, and every meal tasted like boiled sock water. Historians still argue whether the Continental Army suffered more from hunger or blandness. Journals suggest both. In fact, some letters from the period included actual sketches of crying soldiers next to empty salt barrels. One just said, "Send salt, or don't. I'm already dead inside." Soon, soldiers started improvising. One tried sprinkling campfire ash on his food. "Adds crunch," he said before spitting it out. Another claimed tree bark had natural zest. It didn't. One man licked a rock and said it reminded him of home. He didn't elaborate. By midday, Eli faced a full-scale salt crisis. Arguments broke out. Suspicion brewed. Did you use it all, Eli? Did the officers take it? Did the French eat it? Eli, exhausted, held up the empty barrel and declared, "The salt is dead. Mourn it or move on." A silent moment passed. Then someone dramatically lowered their spoon. That was the only thing making this bearable. Dinner that night was the blandest yet. Just water, beans, and whatever dignity was left floating on top. Eli took a bite. It crunched somehow, probably from a bit of dirt. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'd sell my soul for a salt shaker." The beans had cooked too long. What started as a hopeful pot of slightly over-soaked legumes had turned into a thick brown slab, the kind of thing that held shape, that bounced if dropped, that made a thud when you sliced it. Eli stared at it, confused. "That's not soup anymore." He poked it with a spoon. The spoon didn't sink. It just rested on the surface like a canoe on frozen pond water. He sliced a piece and offered it to the nearest soldier. "Bean loaf?" The man accepted it cautiously, turned it over in his hands, then tossed it at a wooden post. Thunk! The post rattled. "Good for dinner or defense," Eli muttered. Historians still argue whether overcooked beans were a battlefield hazard or just an unfortunate kitchen accident. But there are at least 2 confirmed records of meals becoming so solid that they were repurposed as improvised weapons, or doorstops. One journal from a Massachusetts soldier simply said, "Through breakfast at Raccoon. Worked." By midday, Eli had officially lost control of the pot. The bean mass was no longer food. It was construction material. One soldier carved his name into it with a knife. Another challenged a friend to toss it at a tree. The tree lost a branch. Someone called it patriot pudding. Still, men were hungry. So Eli did what he could. He sliced it like cake and served it on cold tin plates. "Eat fast," he warned. "Once it cools, we'll need a chisel." A young recruit took one bite, made a face, and whispered, "Is it fighting back?" Eli shrugged. "Revolutionary beans, they've got spirit." The officers stayed away that night. No one wanted a food-based rebellion. But by sundown, someone had smuggled a chunk of bean brick into the weapons tent, just in case. Eli sat by the fire, watching a soldier try to sharpen a corner for fun. Smoke curled upward. The pot was officially empty, unless you counted the residue that might never come off. He leaned back, wiped his hands, and muttered, "Dinner and armor, all in one." And somewhere nearby, a rat sniffed the air and walked the other way. There was a chicken in camp. Not a cooked one. Not in a stew. A live chicken. Fluffy, red-combed, smug as can be, strutting around like it owned the place. No one knew where it came from. One morning it was just there, pecking at crumbs near the supply tent, weaving between boots, occasionally clucking with the sass of a seasoned general. And the moment Eli saw it, his stomach actually growled. It was the first fresh meat any of them had seen in weeks. By noon, the chicken had a name, Dinner. By sundown, it had 12 names. Lieutenant Peck, Feathers McGee, and oddly, Colonel Clucksworth among them. It roamed the camp freely, evading capture with ninja-like skill. At one point, it jumped onto an officer's lap mid-meeting. The officer called it spirited. Others called it a gift from heaven. But Eli saw it for what it truly was, soup waiting to happen. He eyed it carefully, planning routes, bait, and timing. Private Miller had a different approach. "We should form a committee," he said. "Discuss the ethics." Eli responded, "It's a chicken, not a diplomat." Historians still argue whether small livestock like chickens were kept intentionally or just wandered into camp. Chickens were, after all, useful: eggs, meat, pest control. But keeping one alive around starving soldiers? Risky. Rumors spread fast. Someone said the chicken belonged to General Washington's aide. Others claimed it laid golden eggs. One soldier swore it had pecked him for sneezing too loud. By evening, Eli had laid out crumbs near the cook fire, a rope tied in a loop nearby. The chicken approached, then turned, flicked its tail feathers in what was clearly mockery, and strutted off. Laughter erupted from the tents. That night no one got the chicken, but someone added feathers to Eli's bedroll as a joke. He didn't laugh. The bird clucked nearby, victorious. "Sleep with one eye open," Eli whispered toward the darkness. "Tomorrow, your stew." But deep down he wasn't sure who would win, him or Colonel Clucksworth. The last biscuit burned, and morale burned with it. It had started out so promising. A tiny lump of dough scraped together from the final dregs of a flour sack, a drop of animal fat, and the ghost of a yeast packet that never existed. Eli had shaped it carefully, placed it gently on a flat stone near the fire, and watched it rise, slightly, beautifully. Then the fire flared, just for a moment. A gust of wind, a spark too strong, and the entire stone turned into a culinary funeral pyre. By the time Eli grabbed it, the biscuit was black, charred, flaky in all the wrong ways. The bottom fused to the rock like it had signed a contract. "No!" Eli hissed, holding the edge of the scorched puck. Private Greaves walked up, took one look, and said, "You killed it." "I tried," Eli muttered. "I really did." Historians still argue whether the Continental Army ever had access to leavening agents, or if biscuits were always doomed to be flavorless bricks. The truth is, even when the flour was decent and the fire behaved, biscuit success was unlikely. The soldiers mourned visibly. That was supposed to be for all of us? It was going to be real bread. "I dreamed about that biscuit last night." One soldier tried to salvage it, scraping off the blackened shell and nibbling the center. He chewed for a full minute, then stopped and stared into the distance like he'd lost something deeper than food. Eli offered broth. No one wanted it. "Let us grieve," someone said. Later that evening, the charred biscuit was buried in a shallow pit behind the fire, with a twig marking the spot. Greaves gave a short speech. It was round, it was hopeful, and it will be missed. Eli said nothing, just stared at the ashes where bread once tried to be. That night the fire burned lower. The soup was thinner, and hope, like the biscuit, crumbled quietly into ash. A stray dog wandered into camp, and for the first time in days, every soldier looked at it the same way. Hungry. It was scrawny. Ribs like fence posts, ears torn from old battles, tail wagging like it didn't know it had stumbled into a camp full of starving men who'd just buried their last biscuit. It sniffed the air, paused near Eli's cook fire, and sat like it knew. Someone muttered, "If it gets any closer, I'm getting my knife." Another, "We could stew it, make it last 2 days." Eli just stared at the dog. It stared back. There was a long, quiet moment. Tension built. No one moved, except the dog, who casually licked its paw like it wasn't the subject of a dozen very dark dinner fantasies. Historians still argue whether soldiers during the Revolution ever ate animals like dogs. Officially? Absolutely not. Unthinkable, unacceptable, unpatriotic. But in the unofficial, cold, hungry version of history? Well, let's just say pets weren't always safe. Eli slowly reached for a piece of dry bread. Yes, one that had been hiding under a blanket for days, and tossed it toward the mutt. The dog sniffed, nibbled, then, to everyone's horror, spat it out. Gasps rippled through the tents. "It rejected our food? Even the dog thinks it's garbage." Maybe it's French. The mutt wandered off after that, unimpressed. But it didn't leave. Oh no. It circled the camp twice, barked at a tent flap, stole a sock from the laundry line, and eventually curled up near the fire like it belonged there. Eli sighed. Great, now we're feeding critics. That night the dog stayed. No one cooked it. No one could quite bring themselves to. Some even claimed it brought luck. Others just liked the company. Eli gave it a name, Lieutenant Lickface. He didn't pet it, but he also didn't not pet it. And when it licked the pot clean after dinner, no one stopped it. Because honestly, it might have been the only one truly enjoying the food. It began with a whisper. "Someone's got garlic." Eli didn't believe it at first. Garlic was long gone, lost somewhere between spoiled crates and forgotten shipments. But then, during breakfast prep, if you can call hot bean water prep, he caught a whiff. Faint, but real. Warm, sharp, earthy. Garlic. He followed the scent like a bloodhound, weaving through tents until he found Private Finch crouched behind a barrel, dicing something in secret. Eli stared. "Is that garlic?" Finch froze. Then, slowly, proudly, held up a shriveled bulb like a crown jewel. Traded for it. 3 buttons and a strip of bacon grease. It was glorious. It was illegal. Garlic wasn't banned outright, of course, but hoarding? Smuggling flavor while everyone else chewed on disappointment? That could start riots. "Say nothing," Finch hissed. Eli, stunned and slightly emotional, whispered back, "Give me 1 clove. Just 1. A deal was made. 1 clove traded for the last corner of a decent hardtack biscuit. No one else knew, not yet." Eli diced it carefully, tossed it into the morning stew, quick and quiet. The change was immediate. Soldiers leaned closer, nostrils flared, eyebrows lifted. "What is that smell? Are we in France? Is this flavor?" Eli said nothing, just stirred. Historians still argue whether flavorings like garlic or herbs made it into revolutionary camps with any consistency. Some say yes, smuggled by friends, civilians, or clever traders. Others say it's exaggerated folklore, tales built on the wishful memory of taste. But that morning garlic was real, and it lit up the camp like gossip in a church pew. Soon, soldiers were whispering about a secret stash. Some claimed Eli had French connections. Others believed the dog had dug it up. Lieutenant Lickface became a suspect in a completely fictional garlic smuggling ring. By nightfall, Finch was in hiding. Soldiers were offering buttons, socks, even musket oil in trade. Eli kept stirring, pretending not to notice, but every now and then he smiled. Because for the first time in weeks, the stew didn't taste like surrender. The meat was mysterious. It showed up in a sack tossed from the back of a supply cart. No label, no explanation, just a slightly greasy canvas bundle and the faint hope of protein. Eli stared at it like a riddle. It was too pale for pork, too firm for beef, and shaped like something that had definitely been alive once. He poked it. It jiggled. Private Miller leaned in. "What is it?" Eli shrugged. "Meat-shaped." No one questioned it further. That was the rule. If it arrived and didn't scream or crawl away, you cooked it. He sliced it, barely. The blade caught on tendons, gristle, something rubbery. The inside was gray. That didn't narrow it down. Still, it went in the pot. Salt? Gone. Pepper? Never had it. Garlic? vanished into myth. So Eli tossed in a rock-hard potato and a prayer. When it was ready, if ready even applied, the stew had a strange sheen. Soldiers gathered like moths to an ominous flame. "What's in it?" someone asked. Eli stirred. "I honestly don't know." The first bite was tentative, slow chewing, confused blinking, a grimace. Private Greaves lowered his spoon. "This is revenge in food form." Another whispered, "Is this raccoon? Be honest." A third said nothing at all, just stared off into the middle distance like the meat had told him a terrible secret. Historians still argue whether cooks like Eli ever served meat without knowing the source. Some claim scavenged or gifted animals made their way into pots, cats, possums, even the occasional squirrel. Others think these are exaggerations meant to mock army food standards, but if you've ever looked into a stew pot and questioned your life choices, you'd believe every word. That night, rumors ran wild. It had toes. It was just one giant tongue. Don't ask questions, just eat and move on. Eli took a bite out of professional duty, chewed, paused, then took a second bite just to confirm it was that bad. It was. He whispered, "This isn't food, it's a dare." Even the dog wouldn't go near the pot. That's when you really knew it was serious. The rain returned with a vengeance. It didn't fall, it attacked. Sheets of icy water slammed into the camp like nature itself was sick of the war. Tents sagged, fire pits drowned, and Eli's cook fire? Gone. Just a puddle where hope used to be. He stood in the mud, water dripping from his hat, coat, eyebrows, watching his only pot float gently across the dirt like a sad little boat. "Of course," he whispered. With the fire out, dinner was raw, again, and cold, again. Eli managed to light a spark once, crouched beneath a leaky tarp, but it fizzled faster than the coffee ration scandal. He tried dry wood. He tried paper scraps. He even tried using hot language. Nothing worked. So he did what any wartime cook would do, served the food cold and lied about it. "It's a chilled stew," he told the first soldier. "New trend." The man tasted it and shuddered. "Tastes like betrayal." Eli nodded solemnly. "Good, it's historically accurate." Historians still argue whether food could realistically be cooked during heavy storms in open camps. The answer? Mostly not. Makeshift shelters helped, but smoke, wet wood, and constant wind made reliable meals nearly impossible. By midday, soldiers were chewing unboiled beans like desperate squirrels. Someone suggested sitting on their soup to warm it. Another heated his biscuit with body heat, then immediately regretted it. A private approached Eli, holding his tin cup full of cold stew. "Do I eat it or throw it at the British?" "Depends on how far you can throw," Eli muttered. He finally retrieved his pot, half full of rainwater and what might have once been potato bits. He didn't dump it, just stared into it like it held the meaning of life. The dog barked once, then sneezed. That night the camp shivered in damp blankets, gnawed on wet bread, and dreamed of fire. Not for warmth, for cooking. Eli curled up next to a stump, arms around his pot, whispering, "Just a little dry wood, that's all I ask." The rain replied with thunder. It was Tuesday, and that meant powdered eggs. Sort of. They didn't come in a box or a bag marked eggs, of course. They came in an unmarked tin, handed to Eli by a quartermaster who looked more confused than usual. "Says egg product," he grunted. "Could be edible." Inside was a pale yellow dust, dry, smelled faintly like chalk and broken promises. Eli stirred a spoonful into warm water. It fizzed. That wasn't promising. He added more water, then set it over the fire, which was finally crackling again thanks to a miracle break in the rain. The mixture thickened, slightly. It turned a bit lumpy. Definitely scrambled. Possibly alive. Private Greaves wandered up. "Are we having eggs?" Eli nodded slowly. "That's what the label said." The pot of eggs hissed and burped. Someone nearby said it smelled like old glue. Another guessed soap. But the hunger was stronger than hesitation. First spoonful went to Greaves. He chewed slowly, face twitching with each bite. "Taste?" Eli asked. "Like disappointment and powdered socks." Still, the line formed. One by one, soldiers took their turn with the strange yellow scramble. Some added biscuit crumbs. Others tried mixing it with broth. One man swore adding ash made it tolerable. Historians still argue whether powdered egg substitutes were actually used in the Revolution or appeared later in wartime diets. Some accounts describe dried or preserved eggs traded among camps. Others think it's a culinary myth, created by modern reenactors who'd rather not eat actual eggs that expired 3 centuries ago. But in this camp, powdered egg Tuesdays became real. Later, a private found a beetle in his portion. He didn't complain. More protein than usual, he said with a shrug. Eli just kept stirring, watching the powder swirl into vaguely breakfast-shaped mush. At least it was warm. That night, a few men claimed to feel stronger. One soldier claimed to see better in the dark. Eli just stared into the pot and whispered, "This might not be food, but it's something." And on this Tuesday, something would have to do. The ale ration was a lie. They'd been promised it for weeks. Rumors spread like wildfire. "There's a barrel coming," they said. "Real ale, English style, strong enough to knock the cold off your bones." Eli didn't believe it. He'd learned by now, if it sounded good, it wasn't true. Still, when a small cart finally rolled into camp carrying a wooden keg stamped with a faded seal, even Eli's cold little cook heart flickered with hope. Soldiers gathered. Faces brightened. Someone even started humming a tune. The keg was rolled ceremoniously to the fire, set down like a sacred offering. Private Miller leaned in, eyes wide. "Smells ale-ish." A tin cup was filled, steamy, brownish, frothy sort of. Eli took a sip. Then he spat. "This is ditch water," he said flatly. It wasn't ale. It was lukewarm, vaguely bitter, and definitely not fermented. At best, it was grain-flavored disappointment. Still, a few brave souls tried to convince themselves. "If you squint, it's ale," one muttered. Another took a second sip and declared, "Well, it's wet." Historians still argue whether real ale rations ever reached frontline camps or if they were quietly replaced with barley water, vinegar water, or, on the worst days, just boiled stream runoff. There's evidence of soldiers being promised drink that never came, or worse, arrived already spoiled. The anger came quickly. "You call this morale? I'd rather drink my boot water again. This is floaties." Someone tossed their tin cup across the fire. It landed near the dog, who sniffed it and sneezed. Eli stood there, holding the cup, expression blank. He'd imagined handing out steaming mugs of real ale, a reward, a break, a small sip of peace. Instead, he poured his ration into the dirt. Even the dirt looked offended. That night, soldiers sat around the fire, sipping very little, saying even less. And as the fake ale barrel sat in shame, Eli muttered, "You lied to us, keg." No one toasted. No one cheered. They just went to bed thirsty and bitter in every possible way. The war might not have ended yet, but Eli was already writing the final chapter in his head. He had no ink, no proper paper, and definitely no time. But at night, when the fire was low and the camp had finally gone quiet, he scribbled with charcoal on scraps of flour sack and biscuit paper. His cook's journal, he called it. More like a survival log. Page 1. Day 1. Arrived with big dreams and a clean apron. Left both behind in the mud. Page 37. Boiled the same beans 3 days in a row. They got angrier each time. Page 70. Dog stole my biscuit. I let him. He's earned it. There were no flourishes, no glory. Just the raw, greasy truth of trying to feed men in a war zone with barely enough ingredients to make disappointment stew. He wrote about the missing onions, the powdered eggs, the vinegar revolt, the chicken that got away, the garlic black market that nearly caused a knife fight. Historians still argue whether soldiers kept personal journals regularly, especially cooks. Many didn't have the time or the supplies, but a few did, fragments tucked away in old coats or buried in trunks. Honest voices, quiet ones, and rare. Eli didn't write for fame. He wrote because one day someone had to know that while generals marched and cannons roared, there was a man scraping burnt stew from the side of a dented pot, trying to keep 30 people from starving or mutinying every day. That night, he finished another page. Day 113, made a biscuit so hard it repelled musket fire. Private Greaves wants to wear it into battle. Then he folded the ragged paper, tucked it under his coat, and stirred the pot one more time. The beans were soft, the fire was kind, and for once no one was yelling. He leaned back, letting the steam wash over his face, and muttered, "This war better end soon, or I'm going to start cooking on purpose." It ended, not with a feast, but with an empty pot and a silence that felt strange. Peace had been declared. Rumors became reports. Officers confirmed it. The British were leaving. The war, somehow, unbelievably, was over. The soldiers didn't cheer right away. They just stared. Some blinked. One cried. Another checked his stew bowl as if victory might be floating inside it. Eli stood by his cook fire staring at his gear. One pot, one burnt ladle, a sack with 3 beans, 2 crumbs, and a rock that looked like bread if you squinted. That was it. For the first time in years, he didn't have to cook. No more biscuit disasters, no more onion thefts, no more mystery meat Tuesdays. It should have felt like freedom, but mostly it felt weird. Historians still argue whether Army cooks were celebrated when the war ended. Spoiler, they weren't. Most slipped away quietly, forgotten behind the louder heroes. The generals, the drummers, the horses that didn't run away. But Eli had a legacy. The men knew it. Private Miller approached, holding a tin plate. "Is the stew still hot?" Eli smiled faintly. "No stew, no war, go home." The soldier looked surprised. "Really?" "Really." Then Greaves came by, biscuit tucked into his belt, helmet dented, eyes wide. "You gonna miss it?" Eli thought about it. The smoke, the hunger, the insults, the dog, the time he used shoe leather in a soup. "Parts," he said finally, "very small, strange parts." One by one the soldiers wandered off, some to pack, some to sleep, some just to stare into the woods and wonder what came next. Eli sat down one last time next to his fire. The pot was clean, miraculously. The stew was gone, so was the war. The wind was soft. Lieutenant Lickface lay nearby, snoring faintly. Eli pulled out a scrap of paper, wrote one last line. "Final entry, war's over, appetite still missing." Then he folded it, tucked it into his coat, and leaned back against a log, staring up at the stars. They blinked above him, gentle and quiet, like the war had never happened at all. And now the campfire fades. The crackle dies into a gentle hiss. The smoke softens into mist, and the stars above stretch a little brighter, a little wider, like they've been waiting for you to look up. The war is behind us. The hunger, the noise, the arguments over onions and bean bricks, they're all distant now, just echoes in the stillness. Eli's hands, once blistered from fire and frost, finally rest. His pot cools beside him, dented and loyal, and the air, though still cold, is no longer biting. It just wraps around the camp like a soft old coat. Somewhere a dog snores. A biscuit, somehow uneaten, rests like a tiny monument beside a sleeping soldier, and the trees no longer tremble with distant cannon fire. They simply whisper, leaves brushing like lullabies. You made it through the worst kitchen job in history. And now? You're safe. Full, not from food maybe, but from the quiet that comes after the storm. Let your eyes drift closed. Let your breath match the slow rhythm of the stars above. Nothing to cook, nothing to clean, no onions to guard. Just rest. The war is over, and the only sound left is peace. Sweet dreams.